welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are joined by Nandita Patel, and Nan is a Vedic astrologer who has truly devoted her life to her soul's purpose and helping others find their soul's purpose. Nan started delving deep into the world of Vedic astrology at a time in her life where she found herself questioning everything and feeling dissatisfied, discontent, unhappy, and just knowing that there was more to discover about herself and the purpose of her life in general. And through her uncovering of Vedic astrology's wisdom, she reconnected to her purpose. I wanted to have Nan on to talk about Vedic astrology and the difference between Vedic and Western or tropical astrology and what Vedic astrology can offer to us. And we really go into that. We go deep into Vedic astrology. But even more than that, Nan shares how she embodies living her purpose. Nan is the embodiment of practicing what you preach and teaching by example, being the living example, the living embodiment of who you are meant to be, your truest self, truly connected to yourself. We talk about how to connect to your truth, your purpose, your path, and how to get out of your head and into your heart. This conversation is a reminder to question what you thought you once believed and reconnect to your true heart's desires. I hope that this one helps you shift your perspective on life. And with that being said, let's get into the episode with Nan. Nan, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. Before we get into all the Vedic astrology magic, what is one thing you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
I think that the most important thing about me is that I'm very pragmatic, in this world that we live in. A lot of the philosophies out there, a lot of the methods are so idealistic at times, but being able to sort of like integrate whatever that you can and make it part of your life, your day to day, is something that I live by. And so I'd like people to kind of just see it that way, even for themselves. And I like to kind of be the person always in my life, sort of like lead by example. Like I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that I'm not able to do. So I speak from experience. I kind of like walk the talk and talk the walk, which is something that even the people that know me know that very much about myself. Sometimes they get curious, like, oh, you're not saying anything. I'm like, yeah, I haven't done it yet. So I wouldn't know. So experience, I think, is something that I can offer to people and really identify with what they may be going through or how it has worked from me, from my angle. And so I can speak from real true life experience, right? When I'm suggesting something or when I speak about anything. Yeah.
Well, I love your answer for so many reasons. One, it is so aligned with your human design, like to a T. You are the life experimenter. That's such a huge part of your design. But putting that aside, I believe in that so strongly as well. And I believe that all that we are teaching and talking about needs to be actionable and needs to be applicable to our daily lives. I'm a huge believer in magic, but in the everyday magic that we can embody and actually utilize as human beings.
Yeah, because there's so much stuff out there. And if we can't implement it, it's useless. right? That's just information in our head. It doesn't turn into knowledge or wisdom until you actually do it. And that is where so many people, if they're not guided right, if they're not patient, if they don't really believe in it, it just becomes another thing that they heard about, but they'll never be able to leverage it or use it to benefit them and to really like help themselves in their own life. And life nowadays is so complex and so demanding. We don't have the patience to really implement something that might be difficult or that might be complex. So I think that coming up with ways and showing people that it is possible to use some of these solutions and some of these methods to help themselves, I think that is the most important thing that we, you, or people in this space can do to show people, right? That we live it. We live it. And I think that's important. That's what makes it so different than reading a book. Actually, talk to counselors, to talk to people who are in this space, because we all know there are plenty of people who are just preaching. They're not walking the talk. And that is discouraging to me. And also, I feel like they don't have the depth when it comes to that because they haven't experienced it. They
Yeah.
haven't experienced it. So
And
that's so valuable, I think.
I totally agree. And I think that that's one reason why working with someone one on one is so impactful, especially in a mentorship capacity, because you're seeing them embody it. And you're also seeing that they're just human. Like when I'm working with people, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is how I'm embodying the work that we're doing in my own life. And also, you're seeing that I'm just a human.
Exactly. I think people just think, oh, this is so impossible. Like, I can't do that. Of course you can. I'm doing it.
Mhm.
Here's my experience. This is how I did it. Did I fall a couple of times? Was I totally discouraged? Absolutely. That's the human experience. And that's what people really need to understand. And give themselves that grace of failing, because that is going to teach you a lot more than, being successful at doing something. The failures are so, so important. And it sounds like just one of those things that you read in a meme, but life is just a one big failure, because through that we experience, right? I mean, you look at the entirety of life and there's moments of pure joy and happiness. The rest of the time we're struggling.
Mm.
And that's sort of a very pessimistic way of looking, but those moments of joy, right, is a fruit of all the other times where we've tried and failed and tried and failed. So it is so well worth it for us to even get that moment of happiness, right? Because there's a sense of accomplishment, there's a sense of wow, appreciate all the time that you have spent in trying to do something. So this is just like that. You will fail, you will have struggles, you will face a lot of challenges, but once you get there, it's beautiful. So to show that to someone that it is possible because you're doing it yourself, and also be able to identify some of their difficulties in your own life and share that you're not perfect. Like, let me take out my laundry and tell you what all the nonsense that I've gone through, but look where I am now. So I think that's very hopeful when people see that, especially my clients. I share my stories, my own personal stories, and I'm not ashamed of them. I think that what we go through as an individual, we should be proud of, especially if we come to the other side. It is almost our responsibility to share that story, to give somebody the hope
Yes.
that might need it.
Oh, absolutely. There's this saying, I can't remember if it's failing forward or falling forward, but just a sentiment of how we move forward is through our experiences and normalizing failing and shifting our societal's perspective and associations with failing gives everyone so much freedom to go out and live life. Because I do think a lot of people keep themselves stuck or small because they're so scared and they don't want to be seen trying and maybe failing. I know I've been there and I had to say to myself, I have to give myself permission to be seen before it's complete, before I've got it figured out.
There are just so many expectations, right?
Yes.
It starts from the moment you're born. You're born, you're given immediately a name, a country, an ethnicity, a gender. And guess what? From the moment you're born, you're classified. And now you are expected to feel there's something wrong with you. If you don't, you feel like you're a failure. That kind of stress that we live with is very traumatic after years and years and years of life, right? That is what I think holds a lot of people back because it's frightening. It's frightening to be the one who's going in the other direction. It's frightening to face the masses and what's expected either from our parents, our family, our culture, our country, our friends. People don't realize that, but all those small things that are just assumed as part of life are very, very difficult to navigate through, especially if you're not identifying with what you're being classified as also. It's not just gender, just your thought process, what you believe in, who you should be, what your goals are. I mean, it's just starts from the very beginning.
Yeah, this is something that I've navigated so much in my own life and that I talk about with clients all the time is taking ourselves out of the boxes that society, family, ourselves have put us in, and also questioning them, questioning why do I think that things need to look this certain way or I need to be this certain way, and really giving ourselves permission to think outside the box and being willing to step into the unknown in a really radical way, in a way that people might not understand or other people might be afraid of. And again, this comes back to the failing because you have to be willing for it not to work out. And you have to
Yeah.
be willing to not know what is going to happen from that. And I'm curious what that process has looked like for you because it sounds like you had your own
Yeah.
exploration of all of this, so I'd love to hear about that for
Yeah.
you.
This is such a great way to talk about what you do and what I do because everybody needs to really truly identify with themselves. And that process sometimes takes a whole lifetime. Sometimes that happens very early in age. It just depends on what part of yourself that you're not identifying with and what part of you that you're not honoring and living by. Because the longer you ignore it, the bigger it gets. And then you wake up one day and you hear people saying, I feel empty. I feel like I'm just not identifying with myself. I am not happy with my life. That moment of realization, whether it's coming through a tremendous amount of frustration within yourself or just being pulled into situations where you just feel like you don't belong because this is not you, whatever that looks like, I think everybody gets to a point where they realize, like, okay, what is it? I do need to address what it is that I want, what it is that I want to do, what it is that's important to me, what I consider valuable. And that is really what I say is like shutting off your brain, which is being stimulated by the outside environment, those expectations, the amount of distractions from life that get thrown to you. And it's a point where you acknowledge that you need to shut your brain off and start listening to your heart because your heart is what is been screaming all this time to say, pay attention to me. We have gotten off track,
Yes.
right? And that is when it doesn't know any other way to get your attention other than making you feel empty inside because that void is just growing by the minute and eventually you get to that point. So in my life it was very similar where I just kind of felt like I'm a machine, I'm a robot, I'm just doing everything that's expected of me, I'm just going and I'm going and I'm going. It's like Groundhog Day, day in day out. This can't be it. There has to be more because I aspire to be more. So then the journey starts because you're like, okay, I need me time. I need to think. What do I want to do? I'm questioning what is going to fulfill me. What will actually allow me to feel like I'm loving what I do and actually feel complete and whole, you know, all these things that I want to do about giving to the community, helping people. I have just totally put that in a nice little neat box and put it away because I need to go be in corporate life. And so The journey is now being identified, and you take your first steps. You learn to listen to yourself. You learn to give yourself time. You learn about this whole new world. Well, it's not new, it's quite old. It's the real world of nature and how you belong as part of the nature, that we are not this elevated being and so arrogant that we are, us thinking that we can control nature. And it puts things in perspective because we realize that we are such a small part of nature, and in fact nature is so powerful, and we, our arrogance, our mind, our incredible ego and self-confidence makes us think that we can control it. One little storm and we're hiding in our house. One little snowstorm or a tropical rain, and we run to the groceries to make sure we have all the comforts in the world. So it just creates this very different perspective where you appreciate so many things that you have not before. A simple walk in the park becomes a lesson. A simple walk in the park becomes the time where you actually get a very unique experience of how you are part of this nature and how you are a very small part of this nature, and how we're all very much connected and interdependent. And you start appreciating and noticing things that are really truly valuable, and you start changing as a person. You start changing as a person because we realize that we're all connected, we all affect each other. We live in this ecosystem where it's not just us at the top and then everything at the bottom, because that everything on the bottom is really truly supporting us. And if we don't support that, we have nothing to stand on. So it's just changing the perspective. That is the space that I started to connect with, and then realizing that there were so many things that I could change in myself, and really starting to implement it little by little, carving out a way where I felt like I was really truly being myself, looking at my life and saying, what part of my life I can gradually start changing where I feel more in line with what my soul wants. And I feel natural being myself, my true self, and not have to do things because it's expected of me. It's a gradual transition. It's a transformation that is difficult at times because we're so used to a certain way of life, but it's a sacrifice. But at the end of that sacrifice, you'll feel more in line, more natural. That's the key word. How can you be more natural and feel the peace in your heart? That you're not struggling in your mind, oh, I have to do this and I have to convince myself to do it because I really don't want to do it, but it's expected of me. That thought process that we go through, that we used to go through, and we at times we still go through, we don't want to have that on a daily basis, every hour and every minute. We just want to be, truly just be ourselves and
Yeah.
align ourselves that way. So you're not fighting, you're not swimming against the river, you're swimming with the natural flow of the universe. And that is the key. In my practice, using Vedic astrology, I help people see that using their birth chart, what they are born with, what they have signed up to do in this life. What will it take for them to fulfill that? Because once they move on the path of Dharma, meaning what their soul is actually wanting to do, they feel whole. And in the beginning, when they start that process, it may be challenging, but as you identify and actually do that, you feel you're moving through life at ease and with purpose.
Something that I kept thinking about when you were talking is this shift from living in our mind to living in our heart, is this shift of taking everything so seriously to remembering that everything is sacred. Life isn't serious, but it's sacred. And that shifts our perspective and shifts our intentions from needing to perfect everything and control everything and be the best and prove ourselves to wanting to show up for our lives on purpose and fully alive. and
Yes.
fully aligned and really owning who we are. And I know when I made that shift within myself, it changed my whole life and it changed how I approached life. And it allowed me so much more freedom.
It does give you freedom, it gives you peace, it gives you a sense of purpose. All of those things are very much important for us to be motivated to do things, because without motivation, you're never going to live in the present moment because you don't want to be there. Either you're stuck in the past or you're thinking of something else in the future. And you're absolutely right. It is switching. The switch is the moment you realize that you're in your mind and not in your heart. And that's why you feel the emptiness, because your heart is fed up and the void
Mhm.
has gotten so big that then you fall into this, what everybody so loosely uses is, I feel empty or I feel depressed. But at the same time, they're feeling so heavy. That void that's in the heart, it actually, even though it's void and empty, it starts becoming weight. It actually starts feeling heavy. And that's why people will continue to say, I feel empty, but I feel like this big weight on my shoulder. It's the void that they're feeling because there's nothing that they are connecting to that allows them the happiness and the satisfaction and the motivation to do anything. So, step number one is that realization. And that for me was like, I'm a robot. I'm just doing everything. It just becomes this thing that you're always chasing. You're never in the present. You're always chasing it. And that's exhausting after a while.
I think the key ingredient, honestly, is connection because
Yes.
so many of us are living disconnected from nature, disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from what we truly want, how we truly feel. We're just living on this autopilot mode and fully in our heads and fully disconnected from ourselves.
We're
Yeah.
reacting
Yeah.
100% in a reactive mode. And we're reacting not to what our soul wants, we're reacting to our environment, which is constantly, I mean, we live in an age like you open your eyes and you're just consuming information that we don't need.
Mm-hmm.
So our mind, by its natural state, is just trying to process and discern the information that at the end of the day, we don't even need to discern.
Something that always puts it in perspective for me is that the amount of people and information that we engage with on a daily basis in the past, most people didn't take in that much within their lifetime.
Exactly. And so I'm sure, even with your practice and even with my practice, like meditation, and it doesn't have to be any formal meditation. In fact, going for a walk where you're not staring at your phone, you observe nature and you actually are connecting. That's a form of meditation. Looking at a candle and just looking at the flame, looking at anything that's not feeding you information, even shutting your eyes for a few minutes and observing your breath, which is the most normal way, the beginning steps of meditation. I even tell my clients who are like totally frantic, I'm like, you know what? Go clean your house. Do anything that's repetitive, that's physical. Shut your brain off.
Even just doing something that you would usually do with stimulation, whether it's listening to a podcast or watching TV, doing it in silence.
Exactly.
Taking one activity in your day and doing it in silence.
Yeah.
That will change your life.
That will change exactly. All these wonderful, what is the word I'm looking for? Household techniques that one can implement in their life one step at a time. It doesn't have to be this elaborate method that a lot of these books talk about, that it's so discouraging. But just these little things, the little changes in the beginning, if done on a daily basis, they have a profound effect in one's life. The journey starts there, which I think looking back is fascinating because I'm sure you can also recollect the day you started and where you are now, right? I mean, like, I wouldn't want to be old me at all. I would be like, oh my God, why didn't I start that earlier? It was so stressful.
Yeah. Well, speaking about that, when did you first start getting into astrology and specifically Vedic astrology? And within that, maybe talk about the difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology, because I know a lot of people don't know about the difference between the two.
Yeah. So, with my culture, astrology is a very big part of Indian culture. We do
Mhm.
everything based on astrology. You buy a
Yeah.
house, what time, which direction your house should be, when do you get married, the babies. I mean, the whole thing, the moment we're born, we get a little astrology booklet that's been created by the priest and the astrologers. Generally, the priests are like astrologers. They practice astrology because it is so part of our culture. A lot of Indians are very much interested in astrology because it's part of their life. On the average, the normal average Indian person might know a little bit more than the rest. But when I started in 2019, started getting these feelings about like, well, there has to be more and blah, blah, blah. I really started exploring deeply. And naturally, Vedic astrology is what I went to because it's, like I said, part of my life. And I really started diving deep, self learning. It was a very unique experience because all of a sudden it was like a switch went off in my head where it was like 24/7. I would be cooking, doing anything. I would have earpods. I would be listening to lectures and lectures, self studies, and just everything under the sun, staying up till like 2 in the morning because I was trying to investigate, trying to learn something. Anyway, 6 months of that, and I realized, like, okay, well, self study is just about, I've tapped it out. I need some formal training and get into the heart of things. So I started with that. And then I had a trip to India to really shadow someone and mentor someone to get a feel of everyday problems that people come to and how they're addressed. So it's been a long journey for a while. I've studied under many teachers, and through that, there's this identification to a formal practice that came about organically. Because as you go into this space, especially in Vedic astrology, it's very much part of the holy text or the text that were given by the seers, which is really how one should live their life. They're not religious texts in the sense that they're not asking anyone to believe in just one thing. They are really defined as numerous stories that show what the human experience is and all the difficulties that a human can go through in their life, and all the stories collectively teach you a lesson and show you how different situations in one person's life can be handled. So it's sort of like a moral code or something, right?
Mm.
You can say. So these texts, the Vedas, show you how humans should interact with nature, with amongst themselves, how you can really elevate your consciousness also to identify and to be one with the supreme consciousness. What is the difference between being immortal and mortal? Talking about how all of us are really light beings. Our souls are transient. We're not this body, this mechanism that we're putting on. So it talks about so many different things. So deep dive into those and all of the mythology that goes with it to help our little mind understand what the seers were trying to tell us at a much profound level. Studying all that, it really got me into understanding that from my own personal perspective, from my personal interest, to understand my own life. And then I realized that Jyotisha, which is Vedic astrology, is such a big part of that. And then the natural questions started coming up. How do I know? How do I know what I'm meant for? How does this soul know, which is here for some kind of experience and to learn from that experience? How do I identify? I don't know. So then it brought me to Vedic astrology, which is like, what is this about? And then this is really trying to show you the blueprint of our life. Vedic astrology is more focused on from a soul's perspective. So it talks a lot about karma and what your soul is meant to be doing for this life that you've taken, this birth, and how we fulfill the purpose of our life. And in Vedic astrology and in the Vedas, they talk about 4 pillars of life that each soul will experience and fulfill the karma attached to those 4 pillars of life. Those 4 pillars are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is being responsible not only for yourself, but your duty and your family and your children and the community, living a very conscientious life and being aware of the surrounding and your impact in that surrounding and your environment to others, to animals, not just other human beings and not just other families, but to everything that's surrounding you. That's dharma. dharma of a human being, not just dharma of an American or Indian or any other ethnicity, but you as a human being, you as part of this nature. So your dharma to your planet, dharma to the animals, the plants, everything. We are all connected. So that's one pillar. And every one of us has some karma attached to that. And that's something that we must fulfill as part of this journey for this birth. And then there's the artha. The artha is what and how will you sustain yourself. So the industrious things that we do, our careers or jobs, it's a means of creating resources that we need to sustain ourselves. And then there's the kama. Nobody's saying, the seers weren't saying that you have to live such an austere life. There are karma that you need to experience that bring joy in your life through union with chocolate, music, a person in your life, physical union. Kama is the desires that a soul has that must be fulfilled, because we're coming here to experience our karma, but our karma is not positive or negative. It could be both. So there could be positive karma where you need to experience certain joys of life. That's kama, the third pillar. And then when you have fulfilled the dharma, artha, kama, the fourth pillar becomes a little bit more tangible and attainable, which is liberation. There's very lofty ideas and books and philosophies about liberation, but liberation to me is having the choice while we live on this planet, in this body, having that freedom to do what we truly, truly want. That's liberating. One example, when you are addicted to something, okay, let's just say whatever it is, and because of that addiction, you're chasing all these other things, you need to satisfy that addiction. The moment you break that addiction, you are liberated from it. And the stress from that is gone. So I think that liberation, even though it's quite lofty, liberation can be experienced while you live. And that is the best kind, because now you're living a life of freedom. And there are levels of liberation, and people can aspire to all those different levels. But to me, liberation is I want to live freely and not be tied down because of my entangled web that I've created because of the unexpected demands or my addictions or the false expectations, all of that we carry around sometimes, all placed by our own selves and not even others. When you are liberated from that, it's amazing. That's what you want. So in Vedic astrology, I use that and help a person understand. So Vedic astrology does focus on those four pillars a lot, and karma. Whereas tropical astrology, it's a little bit different. It's a solar based where we actually look at the environment. Vedic astrology is really focused on the inner path by looking at those four things very deeply. It's trying to connect you to your soul. So we use the placement of the moon because we believe that in Vedic astrology, moon is the reason for your birth. So we really deep dive into the placement of the moon in the chart, and that really helps us. And one of the unique things about Vedic astrology is that it divides the zodiac even further. Each zodiac is divided further into little sections that are called the lunar mansion. And each lunar mansions, what we call nakshatras, have a very defined karma and a story behind it, which actually helps us understand at a deeper level that if your moon is sitting at a certain degree within the zodiac, how much or what part of karma will really play out. So I think that the general consensus that you will find out there when you do a search between difference between Vedic and tropical is that generally people feel like Vedic is a little bit more precise, is because it allows us to narrow down. Not all Aries are the same. They're totally different. You're like, how is that? Well, it's where in Aries, where you are in that entire zodiac matters. And we have ways to look at it. differently. So the nakshatras allow us to further divide the 30 degrees in the zodiac and narrow it down because they all have unique stories attached to them. So that really helps. And tropical is just a different method where there's a huge focus on the solar calendar and the equinox and the seasons. They really deeply examine the sun and the placement of the sun, which is really our exterior definition. What we look like, what our personality, sometimes it lends to that as well. It's more focused on the exterior, whereas Vedic is more focused on the inner path, the spiritual path, more focused on the soul.
Wow, my heart is like, I need to know more about this. The way you're describing it, it's so beautiful. And also, so much of it is interwoven into other modalities I've learned through yoga and even through human design. There's so much connected through all of this. And I find it particularly fascinating that you in Vedic astrology focus on the moon and the positions of the moon and the cycles of the moon versus the sun. And on a personal level, when I plug in my Vedic astrology chart, I do believe that my sun sign changes, but my moon sign stays the same. That's interesting for me.
Depends on the degree of where the placements are because there's about a 24-degree difference between the season equinox, which is what the tropical astrology uses. Vedic astrology uses exactly the exact position of the current sky, which has shifted by 24 degrees. So you will tend to fall back. It just depends where any of the planets are sitting. And if it's within that 24 degrees, you don't switch signs. If it's outside, then you end up switching. So it's a total mathematical thing.
One question I had is when you're talking about the four pillars, do they go in order?
No, all
They're all
four pillars of life can be investigated to see again. It's a little complex, but the planets map to the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, where they're sitting. We have ways to mathematically identify those positions. And then because we are tying it to a particular position, then we know exactly what nakshatra it is, then we exactly know what karma it is based on the nakshatra. So we're taking slivers. We are able to identify exactly where in that 30-degree zodiac and what particular karma it is, right? You're engaged in all four pillars at all times and all part of your life. They're happening simultaneously. Sometimes you are aligned with one of these pillars and sometimes you're not. But if you're totally not aligned with most of your pillars, that's when you really feel like you're just going through life on autopilot because these four pillars are meant to satisfy your soul. You're here for a reason. Your soul wants to experience certain things in life. We take this journey and come down to this planet in this body. The body makes the soul be able to perform action. The physical action is coming through our body. The soul is an untangible thing.
This is something I believe in so strongly that we want the things we want for a reason, that we are pulled towards certain things for a reason, and they are unique to us and our purpose and our dharma. And when we shut that off, we are shutting ourselves off from
Our own self, our true self.
exactly. And that's why it's so important to get out of your head and get out of the conditioning and get out of the expectations and to tune back into what your heart is pulling you towards, what your true heart desire is.
Exactly. And a lot of people are very confused because there's so much clutter in their head. They need help identifying what it is that looks like. What does their heart soul want? And there's so many different angles. You can go speak to someone like yourself, someone like myself that can help people identify. They can meditate, they can go walks. There's so many things that they can do themselves to be able to discover what it is that they need to connect to. These are all different modalities, different practices, different methods, people out there that can help you. Tropical and Vedic are a little different. There might be some opinion which one is more precise, but they essentially are trying to help you identify, you
Yeah, it
know.
helps you connect back to yourself. And people like you and I who might work with clients, yes, we're external factors supporting you, but our ultimate goal is to give you the tools to connect back to yourself. It's all about coming back to who you are.
Exactly. And then once you do that, you're not going to need exterior help because your soul has the answers. The only help that a person needs is how they can start listening to themselves. Once they start listening to themselves, you are now on correct autopilot. You
Mm.
don't need help after that
Yes.
because it knows what you want. It's just that we are not accustomed to listening to it, and our world doesn't allow us or teach us.
Correct autopilot. I really love that you said that because we do talk about how we want to get out of autopilot mode and back into intentionality and embodiment. But ultimately, we're not living out every single aspect of our lives trying to think about how to be who we are.
Yeah,
That brings us back into our head. We want to get out of the conditioning and question what we've been taught to believe and come back to ourselves so that we can then just exist and be
exist
who we
and
are.
be organic and be natural. We're not natural because
Mm.
we've moved so far away from nature. Somewhere along the line, our ego, our mind, we started assuming that we're not part of nature. And that is so false because we are every bit part of nature. This whole thing, like, oh, we can control this and we're just going to build a city here and we can keep all the animals out. We're just going against who we really truly are. Once we come back to who we are and we realize that, then our ego is not trying to always protect this body because we build houses, we build cities. Why? Because we're trying to protect this physical body, which is not even who we are at the end of the day. There's so much falsehood that is created. So once all that collapses, you realize, oh, now we can just be, and it could be organic. Every day is organic. I talk to some people and they're so stressed, like, oh, I got this thing to do, I got that thing to do tomorrow morning, and they're all worried. I'm like, yeah, I just kind of wake up in the morning and I just kind of see what I'm called to do, and I do. I'm not stressing.
Yeah.
Eventually you get to that point, which is at a low level, kind of liberating because the expectations are not there. You're not worried about all the things that you have to do.
It's so exciting for me to talk to you about this because I'm such a believer in human design and yoga, and to hear it represented in this other modality as well. Like we could be talking about human design
Yeah,
in this like they're so similar in their beliefs and their embodiment, and that just reinforces the power of it all. And something else that came to my head that I'm curious about is when you started to have this reconnection to yourself and started to embrace Vedic astrology in this way, what were aspects in your chart that helped you understand yourself more and your purpose and how you wanted to change your life?
that's a very deep question. But the journey always starts by understanding who you are,
Mm.
right? And reflecting on certain behavioral patterns, good and bad. And being a student of Vedic astrology, you start seeing, wow, this behavior is because of this planet and this is what's happening. So it's getting very intimate with your own chart. So it's a learning process as a student of Vedic astrology, but then to use your own self analysis, basically using you as a lab, you as a experiment, allows you to go deeper. And then, because of the fact that you're using yourself as an example to understand, you two things happen at the same time. Not only are you learning Vedic astrology or whatever modality you're learning, but it gives you such an in-depth, intimate knowledge of you, your
Mm.
inner, and how you are projecting yourself outside, good or bad. That is the most amazing journey that I've had because it allows me to see my weaknesses. It allows me to see my strengths and allows me to see possible opportunities where I need to do better. The most profound thing and what I'm most grateful for, it allows me to understand others in my life. And when you understand others in your life and why they might be doing something and why they are called to do certain things, there is less friction. And that is the gift because when you understand that, You're not reacting emotionally to whatever the situation is hand. You're diffusing it, and you're not really even diffusing it because you become more understanding, because you understand how some of this works, how the planets, how we're so affected, how astrology works, how one's placement and what they're here to do, and what karma they're meant to experience, and what karma you're meant to experience, and how they're delivering that karma that you're meant to experience. And they're just a delivery mechanism. They are not being that way. There's this profound thing that I learned when I started learning about the Vedas and learning about Vedic astrology, and deep, true story of the Sanatan Dharma, which is what we call the Vedas. It's not a religion, it's just a way of life. And one of the profound thing is karma is real, rebirth is real, reincarnation is real. And if we accept that, the whole philosophy about law of causation, meaning whatever I'm experiencing in my life is a result of what I have done, whether I remember it or not, whether I did it in this life or God knows when. When you accept that statement entirely and you really believe it in your heart, then life just gets 1,000 times better, because the things that we deal with, anger, emotional stress, jealousy, greed, acceptance around so many of these things that we battle on a day-to-day basis, go away or help you understand. Because if something happens to me or somebody does something to me, if I live by the law of causation, is that okay, I don't like it, but I'm meant to experience this. And whoever delivered it to me, whether it's a stranger or my own family member or my own kid or whoever it is, they really are not responsible, because this is something that I must have done and it's just coming back to me to experience, to teach me that doesn't feel so good, or maybe it feels great, whatever that lesson is, that I should not be mad or upset or take revenge or yell or scream. Just think how many problems can be avoided if you understand that. So that is the basis of Vedic astrology, because the whole thing is based on reincarnation and karma. And if you just live by just saying that statement again and again in your life actually changes 1,000%. It's like the fuel for this momentum, for me at least, because then things just start to fall away.
Yeah, and you no longer are focused on the specifics of the situation and more of the overall general impact on what it means for you and your purpose.
It's a broader outlook. Immediately you go through whatever the 5 or the 6 steps of, like, whatever, denial, anger, and you jump right to solution. Oh, this happened. I need to look at that about myself. I need to reflect on it. I need to see if I can make it better. Some people never get there. They spend the whole life being angry at someone or being miserable. When we talk about it, it seems so simple. They're very difficult things to do. They really are. I don't want to make it sound like it's all perfect. It's not. That journey for our human mind and our heart is so hard, even to forgive someone. It takes years sometimes for some people, and sometimes some people never forget. But having the realization that when you don't forgive someone or you're angry at someone, that it's only affecting you and making you not happy because you're in this state of being, is something to think about, something to acknowledge, because you are in the prison of your own mind. This is a prison. Your mind is a prison. And we want to break out of this prison. And that's why in Vedic astrology, we say that the moon represents the mind, because moon is the reason for birth. We want to break out of the cycles of the moon and be free of being born again and again.
I think it's also important to point out that this doesn't mean you shouldn't feel how you're feeling or you shouldn't put up boundaries with someone who's wronged you. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this just means to have your human experience, but to be able to overall know that there's more to it than that. To then come back to yourself and be like, okay, what is this teaching me? Why is this here for me? What is this lesson for me? And how am I going to respond to this with intentionality and presence.
Yes, absolutely. Because the only choice we have is our reaction. That is what creates the future karma. If we choose to react positively, it's best. If we choose to react negatively, you're just going to end up creating more karma that you're going to have to address and to be learning from, right? It is important for us to reflect because whatever's happening is happening for a reason. But if we point it inward and address what we have to do, not to ignore it, not to shut somebody out, but to say, well, how can I handle this? And put the focus back on ourselves, than to put the focus on the other person who might have said something you don't like or whatever, is not a good way of handling the situation. Because when happy things happen, we don't put the focus back on the other person. We're relishing that within ourselves. It's only the negative events where we want to deflect from ourselves and put it somewhere else. This whole notion of looking at your own reflection in a mirror, it sometimes is uncomfortable. That's why they say you need to look at your own reflection. Because most of the time, we don't want to do that because we're afraid. Again, the mind is afraid of seeing what it's going to see. Because that usually means that there needs to be something that needs to be changed within ourselves.
And that fear of ourselves and that disconnection from ourselves is what keeps the process going of pushing us farther and farther away from our path. And
Absolutely.
when we can stop and pause and say, okay, I'm going to get to know myself and accept myself despite any discomfort that that might bring, when we're able to go through that process, then we can embrace all of who we are and we can embrace all of who the people around us are, and we can embody this journey that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that's why when we're not ourselves, we run into all kinds of problems at work, relationships, major themes in everyone's life. Everybody is in a relationship, no matter who you are on this planet. It's not sustainable for us to be not ourselves for a long period of time. Eventually, we're going to have to address it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we become very unhappy, and that becomes a projection on people around us. I feel like the source of many, many problems that we deal with in society, in our personal lives, is the fact that we either don't know who we are, we don't know how to identify who we are, we don't know how to align with who we are, we find it difficult to align. I don't want to sound like, oh my God, if you take care of that, everything will get solved. But it is profoundly true that it works that way. That if you truly identify with yourself and you can just be who you are, the rest does work out over time. So instead of addressing all these external things that, oh, today I'm going to address this, it's like a whack a mole. You're trying to address all these exterior things in your life that are falling apart, and it's exhausting after a while. And how long can you continue to do that? It's like the juggler having 20 balls. He may be able to do it for quite some time, maybe a long time, but eventually those balls are coming down. I think it's really important for people to take a moment, reflect, and see how much of what they're doing doesn't feel good. That's the key. Just to start off, like, okay, let me just see how much on a day to day basis that I'm doing that doesn't feel like the right thing to do. Start there and start asking yourself, why are you doing it? If you
Yeah.
don't feel good about doing it, why are you doing it? And if you don't have an answer, start taking those walks.
Exactly. It's not what we're doing, it's why and how we're doing it.
Exactly. So even with living with intention, the intention is what is going to help you live a life that your soul wants, because it's the source of all our intentions, all our desires. We just have forgotten about them.
Speaks to everything that living intuitively wild and my brand and our ethos represents. And so that brings me to my last question, which is, living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
I truly live and breathe that.
Yeah.
And it took a while. It's not easy. And of course, sometimes I do find myself, I'm not sitting in a forest living by myself. We have to participate in this world. So yes, but for the most part, when it comes to things of how I spend my day to day, how I spend the moments with myself, how I am interacting in this world without causing too much disturbance, is what I call living in harmony with my surrounding. And that to me feels more natural and organic and intuitive than anything else. You want to be your true self, but you cannot be your true self and be causing harm to like a million other people. You want to be in harmony with nature, in harmony with your surrounding. And when you are harmonious in that surrounding, then you are by default living intuitively. It's not meant to be like, oh, you need to just not participate in our regular day to day life. But what you still should be feeling and doing things that make you feel good yourself first and others without causing a negative impact. And I think that's truly living intuitively aligned down to your core.
Yeah, that really sums up and wraps up all the different aspects that we were talking about in this conversation. Really embodying the practice and being a human, making it practical and tangible, and staying true to yourself and practicing what you preach.
Yeah, and it's not only just our actions, it's also
Oh,
our minds, it's also our
mm,
emotions. A lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm a vegetarian, but then they'll do something that doesn't fit well. So it's not a fad. You need to lead by your heart.
mhm.
It's very simple. Lead by your heart. But if your heart is damaged, then you're not. So that's why you have to heal yourself first. That's why it's so important not to carry around trauma, not to carry around jealousy and all of those things, which take a lifetime. Like I said, in Vedic astrology, we say the mind is our own prison, and the moon is a representative of our mind as a planet, right? And that's why we put so much emphasis on the moon as being the reason for our birth. So it's our desires that keep bringing us back, and we'll keep taking rebirths because we need to fulfill our desires,
Wow.
right?
We're here to fulfill our desires. I want everyone to hear that very loudly and very clearly. We're
Yeah,
here.
we are here to fulfill our desires and to learn the lessons. But our mind is just, it's one desire after another. And it becomes so focused on our desires that we are fulfilling those desires hook and by crook. So that's where we go wrong. One of the pillars is karma, to experience life and our desires, but not at the expense of others.
And if you're truly living a heart centered life, living from your heart, that's not just about fulfilling your desires and what your heart wants. It's about fulfilling it in a way that's aligned with your heart. And if we're really connected to our heart, then it won't lead us to fulfill our desires in a way that harms others.
Absolutely. Because when we live by our heart, then we see us in everything, even small animals, everything, everything. Then when we live by our heart, this whole new perspective opens up, which is every living, breathing thing, we see ourselves in that. It shifts your focus. And when that happens, believe it or not, the desires you had, they change. You don't want them anymore.
Mm,
You have
yeah.
new desires. It's weird how it shifts because our mind makes up the desires that we want. It's not our soul's desire. Our soul has a totally different desire. We're all one. When you live by your heart centered, the concept of oneness takes hold of your heart. And then when that happens, it's a whole different game.
It's that shift from the head to the heart, and that shifts everything in our life. And finding the way to do that is the key. I know that working with you is one of the ways to do that. I, for one, am so eager to do a reading with you. It would be so transformative for me, I know. So please share with everyone how they can connect with you, work with you, all your offerings.
Yeah, so I have a website called yourcosmicpath.com. It's pretty intuitive over there. Right now, as we speak, there are two offerings, the first time reading and then a return reading. So I have clients that do a check in, and the time is varied. They'll either do once a month, once every 6 months, or whatever, or once a year. But I will have a few different offerings. I'm in the process of updating my website. So I've been teaching Vedic astrology. For next year, I'll have 2 foundational classes and then predictive class, which I'm in the process of coming up with the content so people have a better idea and they can sign up for next year because we're well in the middle of courses right now. But you can find me on yourcosmicpath.com, where you can see what I've been up to and feedback from others and how they feel about it, the courses and the readings and stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for not only sharing your wisdom, but your energy and your heart and the soul of who you are. It's felt and it's needed, and I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you for letting me speak and giving me this opportunity. Most of my passion comes from just from my own experience. And I feel like I wish somebody had told me this when I was younger, how my life would have been different. But at the same time, everything that's happened has brought me to this moment right now. So very much appreciated. No judgment, part of what I went through, because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be here. Right. So I want to share what I have learned through my process and encourage people to identify with themselves and help themselves to live a happier, more fuller, more peaceful, more aligned life.
Our past and our path is how we have become the people we are. So you wouldn't be this
Yeah.
version of you if you hadn't lived out what you have in the past. So I'm grateful for your past.
Yeah, me too. You can't identify with people who are going through it if you haven't gone through it, right?
Exactly.
I'm looking forward to more conversations.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.